Imagine opening your shop in Constantinople nearly 500 years ago. The streets are already crowded. Merchants from distant lands unload expensive fabrics. Traders arrive with spices from vast, arid deserts. Caravans from far-reaching regions bring silk, jewels, and precious metals. The city stands at the center of one of the richest trading networks on Earth. A customer walks in and places a small silver coin on your table. You barely look at it. You already know its value. For generations, this tiny coin had earned something more valuable than silver itself: trust. It was called the Akçe. Across 3 continents, millions of people accepted it without hesitation. Farmers paid their taxes with it. Soldiers received their salaries in it. Merchants carried thousands of them across deserts and seas. For over 2 centuries, the Akçe represented the strength of the Ottoman Empire. But then, something invisible began to change. The coin still looked the same. The Sultan's seal remained stamped on its surface. The size barely changed. Its color remained almost identical. Yet inside, there was less silver than before. Year after year, almost unnoticed, the government quietly reduced the amount of precious metal inside each coin. At first, nobody seemed concerned. After all, money was still money, or so people believed. But that tiny decision would eventually reshape the empire's economy. Prices would rise. Trust would disappear. Rebellions would spread. And one of history's greatest empires would begin weakening from within. This is the story of how the Ottoman Empire slowly destroyed its own currency, and why the same mistake continues to appear throughout history. To understand how it happened, we first need to understand why the Akçe became one of the most respected currencies of its time. When the Ottoman state emerged in the late 13th century, it was still a small frontier principality. Its rulers understood something many kingdoms ignored. An empire could not be built by armies alone. Trade mattered. Taxes mattered. Stable money mattered. Without trusted currency, merchants stopped trading. Without trade, cities stopped growing. Without taxes, governments could not survive. Around the 14th century, the Ottomans introduced the Akçe. Unlike modern paper money, its value came directly from the silver it contained. Every coin represented real precious metal. This purchasing power did not depend on promises. It depended on silver. That simple idea made the Akçe incredibly reliable. As the territory expanded across 3 continents, so did confidence in its currency. Markets flourished. Ports became busier. Trade routes connected thousands of miles of territory. Merchants from diverse backgrounds could do business using the same trusted coin. The empire's economy became one of the largest in the world. For decades, prosperity seemed unstoppable. But maintaining such an enormous empire came at an enormous cost. Every frontier required soldiers. Every fortress demanded repairs. Roads had to be maintained. Bridges had to be rebuilt. Ships protected valuable trade routes across the seas. Then there were the elite professional soldiers. Highly trained, highly disciplined, and expensive. Paying thousands of full-time soldiers required vast amounts of money every single year. As long as the empire continued expanding, new lands brought new taxpayers, new customs duties, new treasures, new silver. Victory financed government spending. Expansion paid the bills. But no empire expands forever. By the late 16th century, conquest slowed. Wars became longer. Enemies became stronger. Military campaigns cost more than they returned. Government expenses continued climbing. Income no longer kept pace. The imperial treasury faced a problem that countless governments throughout history would eventually encounter. There simply wasn't enough money. Instead of raising taxes dramatically or borrowing from foreign powers, the government chose another solution. It began changing the money itself. The practice became known as taxes. In simple terms, officials reduced the amount of silver inside each Akçe while keeping its official value exactly the same. Today, economists call this currency debasement. On paper, it seemed brilliant. If the same amount of silver could produce more coins, the government could pay more soldiers, fund more projects, and cover rising expenses without immediately alarming the public. For a short time, it appeared to work, but history has a habit of exposing shortcuts, because while governments can create more coins, they cannot create more trust. The imperial treasury faced a dangerous question. How do you finance the world's most powerful empire when conquest is no longer enough? The answer would seem simple, but its consequences would echo through history. The government had reached a crossroads. Its expenses continued growing. Its income did not. Officials had only a few options. They could raise taxes, they could reduce military spending, or they could change the money itself. The third option seemed almost painless. Instead of finding more silver, the government simply reduced the amount of silver inside each new akçe. The coin looked almost identical. The imperial seal remained stamped on its surface. The size barely changed. Its weight felt almost the same. To most people, nothing had changed at all. But appearances can be deceiving. Every new coin contains slightly less silver than the one before it. Today, economists call this currency debasement. It sounds like a simple financial decision, but in reality, it was the beginning of a slow economic crisis. At first, nobody seemed concerned. Markets stayed busy. Merchants continued selling their goods. Families continued buying bread. Life moved on as if nothing had happened. But experienced traders noticed something unusual. Older coins felt heavier, more valuable. Craftsmen quietly set them aside. Money changers preferred accepting them. Merchants began saving the older akçe instead of spending it. Before long, the best coins slowly disappeared from the marketplace. People hid them inside their homes. Some melted them down for their silver. Others traded them outside the borders, where the metal itself was worth more than the coin's official value. Only the newer, weaker coins remained in circulation. The government had created more money, but it had not created more wealth. No additional silver had entered the economy. Only the number of coins had increased. And sooner or later, reality always catches up. Prices began to rise. Bread became more expensive. Grain cost more. Livestock became harder to afford. Imported goods climbed in price. Families noticed their wages no longer stretched as far as they once had. Merchants adjusted prices. Again, and again, and again. Without realizing it, the empire had begun weakening the one thing every economy depends on: trust. And once people begin questioning the value of their money, they soon begin questioning everything else. The crisis that started inside a single coin was about to spread across an entire empire. The consequences didn't appear overnight. They rarely do. Year after year, the value of the akçe continued to decline. Prices kept rising. Families found it harder to afford everyday necessities. Workers demanded higher wages simply to maintain the same standard of living. Merchants constantly adjusted their prices. Some refused to accept certain coins altogether. Others preferred to trade using gold or foreign currencies they believed would hold their value. The problem was no longer just the money. It was confidence. Once people lose confidence in a currency, every transaction becomes more difficult. Every business decision becomes more uncertain. Every investment carries greater risk. The effects soon reached the professional armed forces. Once the most loyal fighting force, they watched their salaries lose purchasing power. Technically, they were still being paid, but those coins no longer bought what they once had. Frustration grew. Discontent spread. Several military revolts during this period were fueled not only by politics, but also by economic hardship. At the same time, tax collection became increasingly difficult. Local officials often demanded payment in more valuable forms of money. Corruption spread. Markets became less predictable. The economy that had once united 3 continents slowly became less stable. To be clear, the decline of the empire was not caused by its currency alone. Military defeats, political struggles, technological changes, and shifting global trade routes all played major roles. But a weakening currency made every one of those problems harder to solve. Because money is built on trust. And trust is incredibly difficult to rebuild once it is broken. The story of the Akçe isn't really about silver. It's about confidence. It's about the invisible agreement that gives money its value. 500 years have passed since the government began reducing the silver inside its coins. The coins have disappeared. The empire is gone. But the lesson remains. Throughout history, governments facing financial pressure have often been tempted to weaken their own currency. The methods may change. Silver coins become paper notes. Paper notes become digital balances. But the principle remains remarkably similar. Creating more money is easy. Creating lasting trust is not. History reminds us of that lesson again, and again, and again, because in the end, the strength of a currency has never depended only on what it is made of. It depends on what people believe. And once that belief begins to disappear, even the mightiest empire can start to crumble.